Welcome class 9. In this video we are going to discuss about the French Revolution. In this part one of the video we will be discussing about various reasons which were held responsible for the French Revolution. In this particular part we have to learn three main words. Those three main words in the French Revolution which were actually the demands of the revolution: liberty, fraternity and equality. Liberty talks about freedom, fraternity talks about unity or brotherhood, and equality, which talks about being equal in all the aspects of life in a country. So the chapter starts with the event of storming of Bastille. On the morning of 14 July 1789, the city of Paris was in a state of alarm. The king had commanded troops to move into the city, and rumors spread that he would soon order the army to open fire upon the citizens. Some 7,000 men and women gathered in front of the town hall and decided to form a people's militia. They broke into a number of government buildings in search of arms, and finally a group of several hundred people marched towards the eastern part of the city and stormed the fortress prison, the Bastille, where they hoped to find hoarded ammunition. In the armed fight that followed, the commander of the Bastille was killed and the prisoners released, though there were only 7 of them. Here we see the commander of the Bastille, Bernard Rene Jordan de Launay. He was the commander of the Bastille. He was killed by the people's militia. Bastille was hated by all because it stood for the despotic powers of the king. In the year 1774, Louis XVI of the Bourbon dynasty ascended the throne of France. He was 20 years old and married to the Austrian princess Marie Antoinette. Upon his accession, the new king found his treasury empty. Financial crisis in France. There were various reasons which were responsible for financial crisis of France. Long years of war had drained the financial resources of France. Added to this was the cost of maintaining an extravagant court at the immense palace of Versailles. Under Louis XVI, France helped the 13 colonies to gain their independence from the common enemy, Britain. The war added more than a billion livres to a debt that had already risen to more than 2 billion livres. Lenders who gave the state credit now began to charge 10% interest on loans, so the French government was obliged to spend an increasing percentage of its budget on interest payments alone. Society was divided into 3 different states. This was the system of states in French society. The Society of States was part of the feudal system that dated back to the Middle Ages. Peasants made about 90% of the population, but in spite of being 90% of the population, 60% of the land was owned by nobles, the church, and other richer members of the third state. French society in 18th century was divided into 3 states, and only members of the third state paid taxes. Oppressive revenue system in France. Only members of the third state paid taxes. Peasants were obliged to pay feudal dues and to render services to the lord, which included to work in his house and fields, to serve in the army, or to participate in building roads. Peasants also paid tithe to church. All members of the third state paid taxes to the state, which included a direct tax called tile, and a number of indirect taxes which were levied on articles of everyday consumption like salt or tobacco. Eventually, the population of France rose from about 23 million in 1715 to 28 million in 1789. This led to a rapid increase in the demand for food grains. Production of grains could not keep pace with the demand, so the price of bread, which was the staple diet of the majority, rose rapidly. Most workers were employed as laborers in workshops whose owner fixed their wages, but wages did not keep pace with the rise in prices. So the gap between the poor and the rich widened. Things became worse whenever drought or hail reduced the harvest. This led to a subsistence crisis, something that occurred frequently in France during the old regime. The 18th century witnessed the emergence of social groups termed as middle class. It included rich traders and merchants and manufacturers. It also included professions like lawyers, administrative officials. All of these were educated and believed that no group in society should be privileged by birth. Rather, a person's social position must depend on his merit. Many philosophers played a major role in the uprising of the revolution. One such philosopher's name was John Locke. In his two treatises of government, John Locke sought to refute the doctrine of the divine and absolute right of the monarch. Another philosopher was Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Rousseau carried the idea of John Locke forward and proposed a form of government based on a social contract between people and their representatives. In his book The Social Contract, Rousseau's central argument is that government attains its right to exist and to govern by the consent of the governed. Another philosopher which we will know about is Montesquieu. Charles Louis de Secondat Montesquieu, a prominent philosopher of France who wrote a book, The Spirit of the Laws. In his book, he proposed a division of power within the government between the legislative, the executive, and the judiciary.